During the time before Easter, we talked about Jesus' reputation as a healer, about how he healed people of real sickness and disease. He did not do this through medical means. He did it simply by power. We heard as our gospel reading the familiar story of the woman who touched the hem of his garment, and how although she came up behind, he knew that had happened because he said he felt power go out of him. We talked about how Christians, after Jesus had ascended into heaven, still had the power to heal of real sickness and disease, not through medical means, but simply through power. And they no longer have it, at least not from what we see. We all know sick people that we have prayed for. I've done that a lot lately. Not one has been miraculously healed. I lost 2 parents and 2 in-laws, all of whom were prayed for when they were sick. All 4 of them died. I've lost friends and family members, all of whom were prayed for when they were sick. They all died. I'm sure you've had those same experiences. It has been a source of controversy within Christianity for hundreds and hundreds of years about why these healings that characterize the New Testament period stopped. And we really don't know when they stopped. They're in the New Testament period. And after the New Testament period, there's a period of about 100 years during which virtually nothing has survived in the historical record. It's not until about 100 years after the New Testament period that writings start surviving from Christians again. And when those writings pick up again about 100 years later, there's no mention of these heathens anymore. So we don't know when they stopped. We just know that they were a feature of Christianity at the beginning of the New Testament period, but by about 150 years later, they had apparently stopped. So miraculous healings were a staple of Christianity at the first, and then they stopped. I want us to look at some of the explanations that people have come up with for that. Some people point to a passage from the Gospel of Matthew where Jesus says, "Assuredly I say to you, if you have faith and do not doubt, you will not only do what was done to the fig tree, but if you say to this mountain, be removed and be cast into the sea, it will be done. Whatever things you ask in prayer, believing, you will receive." And then there's something from the book of James that says this, "Let him ask in faith with no doubt, for he who doubts is like a wave of the sea, driven and tossed by the wind. Let not that man suppose that he will receive anything from the Lord. He's a double-minded man, unstable in all his ways." And so people point to those verses and others like that. And they say the reason we no longer have the miraculous healings today is that we don't believe it. We don't have faith behind them. And that's why we don't have it. It's because of our doubts. We pray for a certain sick person to be healed, but deep in our hearts we really don't expect God to heal them. And so he doesn't. Or maybe we pray for a certain sick person to be healed, and then they go to the doctor. They didn't really believe in the effectiveness of prayer, so they hedged their bets by going to the doctor, and so they didn't have faith that God doesn't heal them. In other words, either we don't have faith that God will heal them, or they don't have faith that God will heal them. It's a lack of faith. If you just have enough faith, God will heal them. That's one way people deal with that question of why the healing stopped. We don't have faith. There's another way. Some people point to this from 1 Corinthians chapter 11. Now, Paul is apparently talking about something similar to communion, and he says this: "Whoever eats this bread or drinks the cup of the Lord in an unworthy manner will be guilty of the body and blood of the Lord. Let a man examine himself, and let him eat of the bread and drink of the cup. For he who eats and drinks in an unworthy manner eats and drinks judgment to himself, not discerning the Lord's body. For this reason many are weak and sick among you, and many sleep." That word sleep there means die. Many have died. Now some see this as an explanation as to why the miraculous healings stop. Christians have taken communion unworthily and are being punished for it. And apparently virtually all Christians today take communion unworthily because we have apparently no miraculous healings today. So that's another reason people say that miraculous healings stop. People are taking communion unworthily. Now, still other people take the position that modern medicine is the present-day continuation of the healing power that we see in the New Testament. God still acts in healing people. It's just today he acts through the medical system rather than just through power. So in this view, modern medicine is the continuation of the healings in the New Testament. That's another way people explain the stopping of healing. And of course, the majority opinion today in our lifetime is that there never were any miraculous healings in the New Testament. That all the stuff in the Bible about Jesus healing people and the apostles healing people and people rising from the dead and all its legends never really happened. So the miraculous healings don't happen today because they never happened. All the stuff that we read in the Bible like that's just myth and legend anyway. So those are the main reasons that people have for the healing stop. I reject them all out of hand. I do not believe that any one of those offers an explanation. As far as the first one goes, the one about not having enough faith, it is true that many people came to Jesus and had faith that he would heal them. It is true that he said, "Your faith has made you well." But there are examples of healings where the people that Jesus healed did not have faith. And there are examples of healing where the people did not have faith until after they were healed. And so that one just doesn't make sense because when you look at all the healing, everybody didn't have faith. So it can't be that that's the reason the healing stopped. As far as the explanation about people taking communion unworthily is concerned, that's an obscure passage in the Bible. That subject is only touched on one time, and it's not even clear exactly what Paul is talking about there. We assume it's communion, but we're always careful that we don't ever want to base a major Christian belief on one obscure biblical passage. We always want to have, if we're developing a major belief in Christianity, we always want to have biblical support from different places in the Bible. We never want to take a major belief from just one verse. Now, as far as the explanation put forth that says the healings did continue through modern medicine, I'm going to dismiss that out of hand too. Now, that certainly has been a very popular explanation that God's healing power works through modern medicine. And of course, it has been in the interest of the medical industry to promote that. There is absolutely no scriptural basis for that whatsoever. No one in the New Testament healed through medicine. And most importantly, no one in the New Testament received payment for healing. And certainly, no one became multimillionaires. When Jesus retired, he was not worth $15 to $20 million from being in debt. So, I reject that one today. As far as the final explanation put forth, the one that says that the healings are legend, I don't have to address that. We all know how I feel about that. If you mark the Bible down as legends, that is outside of Christianity. So we're left with no reasonable explanation for why the healings reported in the New Testament times no longer happen today. I want us to stop and consider something. We do see Jesus healing people in the Gospels, even raising dead people back to life. In other parts of the New Testament, we see people being healed. We see dead people being raised to life. But think for a minute. Every one of the people went on to die of something else. Just think of Lazarus. That's probably the most famous one. Lazarus was Jesus' friend, you know. Jesus came and he had died. Jesus raised him from the dead. He came out of the tomb. Lazarus went on to die of something else. Lazarus is not still walking around 2,050 years old today. It's the same with every other person Jesus healed. Every other person the apostles healed. Every one of them went on to get sick of something else and die. The healings, in other words, were not permanent. The raisings from the dead were not permanent. It's not as if death and sickness were forever conquered. It was just a one-time thing. It's not that once Jesus came here to earth, all sickness could be magically healed and all death could be magically avoided. That's not the way it was. The healings and the raisings from the dead were just a one-time thing. A person was healed of this particular illness at this particular time. They went on to get sick of something else and die. A certain person was raised from the dead. They went on to get some other sickness and die again and stayed dead that time. And so the healings and the raisings from the dead were temporary. They were not permanent. It's not that sickness and death were conquered there. It's just that their power was interrupted for a brief time. And that's all. Now, of course, we're not the only people in the world ever to have noticed that and come to that conclusion. Other people have too. And from that, people have developed a couple of ideas. First, there is the idea that the healings and the raisings from the dead in the New Testament were supposed to be an illustration, an example of how life would be once we get to heaven. And of course, when you get to heaven, there is no sickness and death. And so these healings and raisings from the dead that we see in the New Testament were just to give people an illustration of how life would be in heaven. An illustration of what you had to look forward to if you had faith in Jesus. And now, to go along with that, some people developed the idea that this power given to the disciples and the early Christians to do these healings was just temporary. That it was given by God as a means of jump-starting Christianity at the very beginning. You know, you think about it, when Christianity was just beginning, it needed something to fuel the fire, like, you know, to get it jump-started, to make people notice it. And so the idea is that God gave this temporary power to that first generation or so of Christians just to get the thing started. And then once Christianity really started spreading, it could spread on its own, and that was not necessary. And so God withdrew that power. Now, you know, at first glance, that seems to be pretty reasonable. It would seem reasonable to say that when Christianity first started, it needed something to help it along, and it would be a good thing to do to give the early and ancient Christians that power. At the same time, It would give people an idea of the kind of life they have to look forward to in heaven if they would believe and follow Jesus. But when you think more about it, though, this one has a major problem. If God has the power to cure any and all sickness, and if God has the power right now to raise up every dead person, then why does he just not destroy all sickness and death at this time? If God can heal anyone today who is sick, doesn't it paint a really bad picture of God to let people go on being sick? Why would God sit there in heaven for 2,000 years watching all sorts of people suffer horrible illnesses and stuff on earth if he could stop it all? What kind of God who had the power to stop it all in an instant would just sit up there and watch it happen for 2,000 years, consciously withholding that power while billions of people suffer from sickness and sin? You see the picture of God that I did paint? Is that what you believe God is like? That God could heal every sickness of everybody that we know around Cleveland County, the United States, and the whole world, but he doesn't. He just sits there with his arms folded and looks down and watches people suffer. What picture of God does that paint? You see, the question of why the healings we see in the New Testament stop is one of the most confounding issues in all of Christianity. It really is when you think about it. There seems to be no way to come up with any explanation that is reasonable, but yet doesn't present multiple problems on its own. So I'll just tell you how I do it. We live in a scientific age where we look to science to tell us what truth is. We look to science to tell us the way things really are. And science tells us the universe came about through what they call the Big Bang. Is at some point in time something, they're unable to tell you what, but at some point in time something exploded, and then all this stuff in the universe spreads out from there. And at first that was accepted as a theory. It was called the Big Bang Theory, but now if you question that, you're liable to end up at rotten or be declared mentally incompetent because only a fool would question it. So it's fact now. But I read an article a while back in the journal Nature. They have discovered some new galaxies in the universe that are many, many times larger than our galaxy, which is the Milky Way galaxy. The problem with those galaxies is that they do not exhibit the characteristics that the Big Bang Theory says that they should. And so, according to the Big Bang Theory, those galaxies cannot exist. But yet, according to astronomers, they do. And according to one astronomer from the University of Pennsylvania, this upends settled science on the beginning of the universe. It upends it. I was talking to someone a while back from another church that was having difficulty accepting some things. He brought up the Big Bang Theory. He said, "Do you believe in the Big Bang Theory?" I said, "No, I don't." I said, because my thing is that every generation thinks they have everything figured out. I said, if the world is still here 2,000 years ago, they'll have come up with some other idea about how the universe came into being. It will not be the Big Bang Theory, because if science itself goes on, they'll prove that's not true. I said, I don't know what they'll look at things like in 2,000 years, but it won't be the Big Bang Theory. Every generation is tempted to think that we're finally the generation that understands it all. Right? There's something else I want to think about. We've talked about this a little bit been in the past. In the past, people who claim to have seen flying objects in the sky that were not identifiable were sort of dismissed as nutcases. But within the last few years, even our military has come out and released videos of stuff that can't be explained. In 2022, the Pentagon issued a report that admits the existence of these objects and admits they exhibit characteristics that are opposed to our understanding of physics. The report admits these things exhibit technology that is way more advanced than anything even on the horizon for us or anybody else in the world. The report did not speculate on where these objects might come from, but it did acknowledge their existence. So obviously there is something somewhere that we do not know about, and obviously there is some understanding of things that is light years ahead of ours. That does not necessarily mean they come from outer space. They could come from inside the earth. Nobody knows what's inside the earth. It's just a guess as to what's in there. They could be some kind of interdimensional things. We do not know what they are, but they do exist. The point of telling this about the Big Bang and the UFO stuff is to emphasize that although we think our science understands everything, it does not. As I said, every generation tends to think that its understanding is the apex of understanding. Every generation tends to think that we are the first ones to understand how things really are, and nothing will ever come after us that will counter what we say. If the world is still here in 2,000 years, like I said, science will look a lot different than it does today. And those people will look back and laugh at us and wonder how we could believe the stupid things that we believe today about science. Our science does not represent the final word. If the coronavirus taught us anything, it should have been that. So keep that in mind for a minute while we go back to the Bible. Sometimes I've heard it said that the Bible has the answer to all questions. That is not, though, the traditional Christian understanding of the Bible. The traditional Christian understanding of the Bible is that it is the only infallible guide to faith and life, and it contains all things necessary for our salvation. That does not say the Bible gives us the answer to all questions. That does say that the Bible contains everything we need to be saved, and that the Bible will never mislead us. The Bible always points us in the right direction. It is the only guide, only infallible guide. That is, it is the only guide to faith and life that always points in the right direction and never points us in the wrong direction. And it contains all things necessary for our salvation. So our situation today is in the world that we have, over here we have science, which tells us it understands everything. And then it has all the answers. And over here we have the Bible, which really doesn't purport to have all the answers. It just has the only infallible guide to faith and life and all things necessary for our salvation. You see, we do not have all the answers. This side of heaven, we never will. We may think we understand it all, but we do not. I was in seminary for 4 years. And before and after that, I had done much study of the Bible and Christian theology. And I guess if somebody asks you, after all that study, what is the major conclusion you've come to? I would have to say this. I would say the major conclusion I have come to is that there is much, much more to things than we imagine. That we are part of something way bigger than we ever imagined. The universe that we see out there does not represent the sum total of reality. Reality lies somewhere else. No matter how advanced we think we are, in reality, as the Apostle Paul put it, we see through a mirror darkly. And as Paul said, it will only be when we get to heaven that we will see face to face. That is, when we get to heaven, we'll understand the way things really are. I think there's much going on than we can ever imagine. I think we're part of something way bigger than just the universe that we see. There's much more out there. And there's much more to everything than we know. There's much more going on that's way, way bigger than us. Way, way bigger than our ability to comprehend. And I've also come to the conclusion that when we do get to heaven and finally do see face to face, I'm absolutely convinced that we will realize that things in our lives here on earth were never what they seemed to be. It's not that we'll realize something like God has a plan. That's not it at all. But I think when we get to heaven, we will realize that nothing was as we thought it was. That as far as our lives on earth were concerned, it was a blip, almost like a dream. That our existence was far before and would be far afterwards. Now back to our original question of why the healings we see in the New Testament period stop. We do not know. But we don't have to choose any one of the answers that we talked about today, because you see, if you believe there's way more to reality than we ever see, if you believe that there's something out there that's way bigger than us, then you can come up to the point and say, well, wait a minute. If there's something out there way bigger than us, and I can't figure it out, it must mean it's way bigger than me. And so that answer lies up here, not down here. This side of heaven, we will never know. It's not that God has a plan. It's not that God heals some and doesn't heal others. It's not that God would like to heal you, but you're such a bad sinner that he can't. It's not that God's never healed anybody and all the healings you ever see in the Bible are fake. It's none of that. It's none of that. It's not that God's sitting up there with the power to heal you, but just won't. It's just none of that. I think when we get to heaven, we'll see the answer, and the answer will shock us. Because it will be so much bigger than we ever imagined. You see, I want us to all live our lives realizing that there's much more going on than we can see. That we're part of something much bigger